Hello and welcome to Gardening Australia. We're absolutely packed to the rafters this week with everything to inspire you to get growing. Here's what's coming up. Clarence shows us some flowers that are going to hang around.
Some of the most famous of all Australian daisies are the brightly coloured everlastings, or paper daisies.
No gardener has enough space, particularly when it comes to growing food. So I'm going to knock up a no-dig garden to get more space today.
As we move into autumn, I'm going to show you a few important tasks that you need to know to keep your garden looking spectacular.
And I'll show you a magic trick. With this trick, I'm going to clone your plants and make them multiply. Astounding, right? It's all to do with water propagation, and I'll share it with you shortly.
You don't need me to tell you that it's a tough time to buy a house. But home ownership isn't the only path to having a place to put down some roots. Jane's met a renter who's found great enjoyment experimenting in the garden.
I think as gardeners, we like the idea that the work we put into the garden comes with some kind of reward, whether it is just personal satisfaction of a job well done, or maybe you're going to pick a lovely harvest, or maybe just a peaceful moment sitting in the garden that you've created. But for Jess, who we're meeting today, much of the reward will be felt by the gardeners who come along after her. And she's okay with that. Jess and her partner Adrian are renting this standard suburban size block from her parents in the outer eastern suburb of Mooroolbark. Have you changed the garden since you've been here?
I have, definitely, especially out the back. So this whole area was a few fruit trees that my mum had planted, and the rest was a mixture of couch grass and just all sorts of weeds. So I smothered it with cardboard and did sheet mulching to slowly kill it all off.
Good.
And then have slowly planted more and more things. Less space to mow, it's great.
So your objective is to have lots of edibles and lots of pollinators and that kind of thing?
Yeah, exactly.
You obviously have a garden that is owned by your parents, so
yes.
You have to sort of converse with them?
Yes, definitely. So we're renting from them. Some areas are quite flexible, so out here they don't really mind what we do as long as we obviously don't damage anything. Yeah. Out the front, I can't change that as much. We sort of they want to leave that more as a traditional kind of garden that really matches the house and will probably appeal more to people when they resell it.
Yes.
But yeah, this area they're pretty relaxed about.
Yeah.
I don't get hung up at all on designing things. I just buy what I like and I find a spot for it later. You have to try new things to figure out that they work. So that's why I like trying to grow some unusual plants in my particular climate.
So this is a nice little area. You've got plenty of stuff in here.
Thank you. It's a bit experimental, a kind of food forest idea, I suppose.
Yeah, on a mini scale.
Yes, exactly. Quite a few different fruit trees in here. A lot of them are still quite small.
Yeah.
And then in among that, I've planted different sorts of herbs and flowers and also some annual crops as well, like the potatoes.
They look like they're ready to come.
They are just about ready to harvest. I've already snuck a few, but I'll pick the rest soon.
Very good.
This is a Hass avocado.
And it's got a fruit on it.
It's got one whole fruit.
Yay.
So maybe next year we'll get two.
Yeah, and what's this one?
This is a white sapote,
yes,
which I'm very excited about. Hopefully that will fruit here. I think theoretically it will fruit in Melbourne. The mulberry tree.
That's a beautiful fruity. You've got heaps of fruit on there.
So much fruit. So we've already had a big crop from it.
Yeah.
And I really like this because it doesn't ripen everything at once.
And the pomegranate.
Yes.
You could get fruit on that.
Yes, hopefully. It's got flowers.
Yeah.
That's doing quite well.
It's lovely, yes. And this little one in the front?
That one over there is a Jaboticaba.
Yes.
I'm not sure if that will fruit in Melbourne, but it's a good experiment. It's just a nice looking tree anyway, I think. I like just throwing stuff in and seeing what happens.
Good. It's a lovely little area.
Thank you.
The paved area near the house is lined with narrow garden beds behind retaining walls. In a previous life, they had roses and ornamentals, but now they're overflowing with a mix of edibles, including one huge tromboncino vine, cucamelon and oca.
The chickens are hilarious. We call it chook TV. We can literally just sit out here and watch them because they're always doing something.
They galloped, literally galloped
Yes.
when you fed them.
Yes.
Choom.
Yes, and they're always excited to see you. I kid myself that they love me, but I think it's just because I'm holding food.
Are they sort of a permanent fixture, or do you feel that you can easily do things with them if you have to move on?
Yeah, I mean, if I move, they're definitely coming with me.
Oh.
So they've got a really fox-proof area that we keep them in overnight, and then during the day we can let them out into this larger run. And all this netting is temporary. My father-in-law got this off the hard rubbish, so he's
Good.
very pleased that it's getting a second life. And we could just take this away if we need to. Luckily, my parents were fully open to it because they used to have chickens here as well.
Yes.
So that was quite easy. I have had chickens in a previous share house. That, I guess, was a bit of a process of building up some trust with the landlord. We'd already been there for a little while. We were already taking care of the garden. So when we asked if we could keep chickens, I think he was a bit more open to it.
And it proves that you can do things if you do have a little bit of dialogue.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. If it was up to Jess, she'd probably not keep the pool,
Oh, I could grow so much food up here.
but she's planted the surrounding beds with some experiments and edibles, including a young macadamia tree that's starting to look settled in.
It's pretty slow growing, but we do like to think that maybe one day when it's big, we'll come and get the fruits that fall over the fence on the public path. Maybe.
Jess has also put the paved area to work. It's a spot that would likely be too hot for regular pots, but her hydroponic tower is going brilliantly.
We've got a couple that are homemade
Yeah.
and then a couple that we've bought.
Well, this one is spectacular.
Yes, this produces so much food. It's quite
Yeah.
amazing. So there's a reservoir at the bottom, which is filled with water. There's a pump there, which is powered by the solar panel, and that pumps water up to the top, and then it trickles down through here. And it's full of coconut coir and perlite. That's the growing medium.
And so these are going to be separate systems in themselves?
Yes, yep. We've decided we
Wow.
need more.
Yes.
So we're going to have more vegetables than we know what to do with, but that's okay.
So what are you thinking for the future for your gardening?
Oh, well, I would love to have a huge sprawling country property. We'll see.
Yeah.
I'd just love to collect more plants, have more fruit trees.
More chooks?
More chooks, peacocks, I don't know, everything, all the things.
Well, you've done very well
Yeah.
here in 2 years, so you never know where it might take you.
I know in a previous rental, I'd set up a veggie garden, and after we moved out, I had a book accidentally delivered to that house, and the new renters contacted me on Facebook. When I went to go and pick it up, they said, "Oh, did you plant all those veggies and flowers? We've got so many things just popping up everywhere. Thank you so much, it's great." So you never know what will happen.
And it's a compliment to you because you put a lot of effort into a rental garden, and that's wonderful for you and for the people who are following on.
Yeah, thank you.
What is xeriscaping? It's an approach to landscaping that doesn't require supplementary watering, and it's often used in areas where water conservation is an absolute priority. Xeriscaping typically incorporates drought-tolerant plants, things like succulents, Mediterranean species, and Australian natives from arid areas. Another distinctive feature of xeriscape gardens is the extensive use of gravel mulches.
Are all veggies finished once they flower? Once annual herbs and veggies like these spring onions, kale and rocket are in full bloom, the plant stops putting energy into parts of the plant that we like to eat. And eventually the leaves will become yellow and bitter. But the flowers are great to leave in for a while because they attract beneficial insects, you can save some of the seed, and some of them are even edible. But perennial veggies like globe artichokes and certain types of chilies will keep on growing after they flower. So before you rip those flowering veggies out, pause, because there might be more life and food in them.
Why do plants bother to grow tall when they can already access the sun from lower down? Well, that's a great question from an 8-year-old gardener. The majority of plants on Earth are solar-powered. They use the sun's energy in order to grow. And so if they grow above competing plants, they capture the sunlight and put the competition in the shade. Then they're winning. Now, have a look at this corn. The corn in full sun is growing much taller than the corn which is growing in the shade of my pandan. That's competition for you.
As summer and the humidity start to leave us, the nights become longer, and that means the garden shifts its rhythm and starts to slow down. Not us gardeners, though. We actually speed up. I'm going to show you a few important tasks that you need to know to make sure that your garden is in top shape this autumn. If there's one thing that I learned from my family growing up, if you're going to buy something, buy it well. Save up and buy good quality that can be maintained, and then you've got it for life. And secateurs are a prime example of that. This is a good quality pear that's been handed down to me from my grandparents. And they need a little bit of maintenance. Maintenance is a good thing. I mean, you can clean them at the end of each day that you've been gardening because that helps stop passing on disease. But one task that I really enjoy, maybe once a season, but minimum once a year, is to give them that little bit of extra maintenance where you can clean them, sharpen the blade, you know, dismantle it so that you can get access to the three main components, your central screw that's holding it together, your two main arms, and of course the spring. Just drop these pieces into your cleaning agent. I've got some metho here. Swirl it around a bit and let it break down all that build-up. I can get some of the cleaning agent and start to give this a bit of a scrub. And while you're at it, you can take them out and just give them a bit of a brush in case there's grit in the thread. So the next step now is to sharpen the blade. And there's lots of different contraptions out there that you can use to sharpen a blade, but the oldest and simplest one is a whetstone. And you want to think 20 to 30 degrees. That's the rough angle, and you start to see the shine return, and it's a bit like a bought one. And you go, wow, I did that. And now all I have to do is put it back together, put the screw back in, and that should be nice and smooth. Just gently tighten it. And the final step is a drop of oil onto the screw and the nut and allow that to rub in. They're ready for work. They'll be perfect for those deadheading jobs around the garden at this time of year. One of the key autumn tasks is monitoring and maintaining a healthy compost. Now, this is my happy place because compost is something that we can do every day to make a difference. And when it comes to monitoring it, I always suggest to people have 2 compost bins, because what invariably happens is people have one compost bin and then they're constantly filling it and they never get a chance to actually harvest and use the compost. So what you need to do is fill one, and then you have the second one there while this one is maturing. So the first thing to look at, if it's too dry, you'll generally see ants and cockroaches because they love the warmth. If it's too wet, you will know about it the moment you lift the lid because it will be anaerobic and it'll stink. So the way to test is to grab a handful and give it a squeeze. If you get a whole lot of water coming out, you know that it's too wet. If no drips at all come out, it's too dry. You want it to be a bit like a moist sponge where you squeeze it and perhaps a couple of drops come out. This example is perfect because it squeezes together and holds like a nice chocolate fudge, but then when I flick it with my thumb, look at that, it just crumbles. Oh, that is almost edible. So from a complete compost, let's have a closer look at a compost in process. The key to it all is the balance. we're talking balance between green materials and brown materials. If you put your kitchen caddy full of food scraps into your compost, you need to put at least 1.5 kitchen caddies worth of brown material to balance the equation. So in this case, leaves or dried grass or shredded newspaper. And then, of course, you need to turn it, because every time you turn it, you'll bring oxygen into the mix and help the organisms and all the bacteria in your compost to help break it down quicker. I tend to think of my compost bins as pets. They're part of the family. They need a little bit of attention, a bit of TLC. But remember, we don't want full compost bins sitting around. The idea behind it all is to get this good compost out in the garden, building your soil and feeding your plants. They'll love you for it. It's easy to forget that lawn is a plant. It needs the same attention as we give most of our other plants, but sometimes we forget to do it. So the first task that's appropriate at this time of the year is to aerate and alleviate compaction, and that will get it through the winter and have it thrive come spring. On a large area of lawn, you can hire a mechanical aerator or corer, but for most of us, a simple garden fork will do the job. You can get something like this corer. Just go across the area in an ordered way, up and down in rows, 10, 20 centimetres apart. Boom. Once you've finished your aeration, the next step is to top dress. There's a couple of different ways you can do it. You can buy a top dressing mix from your landscape supplies, and basically that's a free draining sandy soil that will go down into those holes that you've created and also fill any little blemishes and bumps and low points in your lawn. And you can also use compost, even better if it's your own. The advantage of compost is that it adds organic matter to the soil, which helps feed the grass, but most of all, it helps hold moisture in the ground. And that gives your grass much more even access to water across the seasons ahead. What we're doing now is massaging the top dressing in. And I like to do that with the back of a normal rake with just gentle action. Get it as horizontal as you can and just sweep up and back. And that will push the top dressing into those holes and into any low points. And before you know it, it's all disappeared. The next step is to apply some fertiliser, preferably on a rainy day, to your beautifully aerated and top-dressed lawn. Choose a well-balanced, slow-release fertiliser so that it will give your lawn the minerals it needs for a nice, sustained growth over the months ahead. Well, there you have it. Practical autumn tips that will not only help your garden through the seasonal changes, but will lay the groundwork for it to come alive in spring.
Whilst the daisy family worldwide is incredibly diverse, Australia has its share, with over 1,000 species. They're not only loved by gardeners, daisies are extremely attractive to our insect friends like the bees and the butterflies. Now, the thing we call a daisy flower is actually made up of loads of these tiny flowers. Means there's bucket loads of pollen and nectar to feed on. Some of the most famous of all Australian daisies are the brightly coloured everlastings, or paper daisies. Now, like the name suggests, they're long-lasting, and as cut flowers, they'll hold their shape and colour for years. In West Australia, you don't have to drive too far out of Perth to catch a stunning display of everlastings in late winter, early spring. You can also plant them in your garden, even in the eastern states. And Josh has some great tips for growing the annual varieties at home. They're easy to sow from seed, and for a spring display, sow in late autumn or early winter in a sunny, weed-free area. Everlastings have been widely cultivated, And these days, there are many perennial varieties available in a load of colours and sizes. And they will grow in a range of climates. One is the compact shrub Dargan Hill Monarch, which has a vibrant yellow wow factor. Another is Daisy Fields Gold, with creamy white bracts and gold florets. They'll respond well to a light prune each year, and this will encourage more flowers. Take a look at Chrysocephalum. Now, with its profusion of honey-coloured button flowers throughout the year, this one does not stop flowering. And it loves a moist soil with moderate drainage, and of course, the insects love them too. And Ozyphemnus. It'll thrive in a sunny spot with well-draining soil, and it makes a lovely feature plant as well as a cut flower. Now, the list grows on. When you start delving into the daisy family, you're bound to find one or three that you'll like and that'll bring everlasting colour for years to come.
You know how much Millie loves getting on the tools. Well, she's doing another DIY project, and you're going to want to give it a go at your place. Toolkit ready? Let's do it.
No gardener has enough space, particularly if they are growing food. And in our cool climate, really, if we want to make sure we have something to eat all the time, we always have to be planting. The good news is you can start a new garden almost anywhere. On some disused lawn, a driveway, even on concrete, simply by using the no-dig method. At the lower end of the slope here and all of those existing beds, I have this great big sunny area, and it gets great winter sun as well, so I want to put it to productive use. It is at the bottom of the slope, which means all of the winter water runs down here. So that no-dig method is going to give me that elevation, which means the bed will drain. It's going to be about 2.5 metres long by 1.5 metres wide. And to retain all of that no-dig goodness, I need to give it an edge. The edge I'm using is just timber. It's a salvaged macrocarpa tree. So I tend not to use railway sleepers because they do sometimes have a treatment on them that gives them a long life under the trains, but not great for growing food. Now, this is only 150 millimetres high, which is enough for my situation, but if you wanted to make a deeper bed, you just join a couple together. I'm using the square to ensure all my cuts are nice and straight. Always clamp your timber down before you make any cuts. I'm cutting all the timber to length, creating 2 long sides and 2 short. I'm also cutting 2 short pieces to act as corner blocks. I'll fix these to the long sides a sleeper's width from the end. This will give me a solid block to screw into, reinforcing the join and stabilising the corners. I'm pre-drilling the holes and using galvanised tech screws, which should outlast the timber. Macrocarpa timber is particularly durable above ground, but where it is making contact with soil, it's more prone to rot. Now, you could paint this to give it a little bit of extra seal on the inside, or even line it with some pond liner or some plastic. But this is only going to be in the ground, I think, for a couple of years. It's not a long-term fix, so a little bit of oil will give it a bit of protection to see it through. It's really soaking that up. So I'm just going to let this dry for a couple of hours while I prep the spot. Just making sure that the whole area is relatively level. I'll level the box as it goes in, but I need a good firm base for it to stand on. I reckon that's good. Oh wow, that is like I bought one. It's perfectly level, which means it's ready to fill. When you're making a no-dig garden bed, you really can use any organic material you can get your hands on. The more diverse, the better. It's like making compost in the ground. So this is wood chips. It's really primo stuff. I scabbed it from the arborists in springtime when they were clearing the growth from around power lines. So once you've got a brown layer, you've got to put in some green. And these deep layers are a fantastic spot to bury leafy weeds. Even stuff with seeds can go nice and deep because they're not going to have any light on them. They're not going to be a problem shooting away, but never rhizomes or runners. The next layer is some clean straw, covered with a little bit of poultry manure and a few shovelfuls of soil. I'll soak the lot to make sure everything's wet through. A little bit more green, because let's face it, you can never have enough. This is halfway between compost and straw, and I think it's going to make a fantastic upper layer for the seedlings. I'm also sprinkling on gypsum, which adds calcium to the bed without raising the pH. And then a small amount of organic fertiliser, just to make sure that all of the microorganisms that are going to turn all of these ingredients into perfect soil have plenty to eat. All I need to do now is give that whole thing another really big drink, and then I'll be ready to plant. I'm going to make some little planting pockets into that top layer of straw, and I'm going to add a little sort of handful of this mix. It's my own compost mix with a little bit of our soil, and I think it's going to be a perfect little media to get the seedlings started. I'm planting the taller crops at the back on the side of the bed that'll get sun, and because these are brassicas, you can see they've got some holes in the leaves. They're a bit worse for wear. I'm just checking them for any caterpillar eggs before they go on the ground. Pretty stoked with that. It took a bit of work, of course, and a little bit of material, but in one day I've managed to get a whole new garden bed up and going, and I really need it. I need a bit more space in the rotation. It really does show you that you really can grow food anywhere, and using the no-dig method, you chuck all those waste materials, pile them up, and you can get fantastic rewards.
You know how much I love gardening, right?
Yeah.
Well, if there's one job I really dislike, that's pruning overgrown bougainvillea. I mean, I love those beautiful coloured bracts, but hate those thorns. How about you, Costa?
All right. Well, dislike, I'll go so far as to say hate. It's a big word, hate. I don't use it. It's not part of my vocabulary. But this is one I hate. When people walking their dogs put their plastic bags with dog poo in my green bin. I hate that. Tammy?
Oh, that's a disaster.
It is. I got to dig it out, and it's like, please.
Oh, gosh. Well, my hate would have to be just a small one, but it's a really annoying one. So, you know, when you're starting a new garden or starting a new section, having to wheelbarrow all that, you know, either dirt or gravel, whatever it is, because it feels like I'm getting nowhere. I'm just going back and forward. And it's the most repetitive thing, and then finally, you know, it becomes...
Patience.
So I need to channel that.
Still to come on Gardening Australia, Sophie visits a vineyard recruiting some tiny employees. Josh has a hole in his bucket, dear Liza. And we meet some artisans using humble straw to create dazzling results.
The easiest way to multiply plants you already have at home is by propagating cuttings in water. It will not only increase your collection, but you'll have clones of your original plant. Most indoor plants work really well with water propagation, and they can last a long time in water. Cuttings from herbaceous plants like geraniums and coleus work well too, but appreciate being potted up as soon as their roots appear. When you get to woodier stem plants, it's best to go straight into a medium like soil or sand, as they can easily rot in water. Many of us use glass jars or bottles, but because roots are light sensitive, they'll actually grow better in non-transparent vessels. This makes sense if you think about how roots grow underground in soil, with no light. This also helps reduce the buildup of algae. If you do want to use up old transparent jars, you could wrap a piece of paper around the main part, or even paint it to give the roots some protection. Now, to get the propagating underway, start by removing the lower leaves from the base of your cutting so they don't rot. Then simply pop it in a glass jar full of water, ensuring that the base of the stem is always submerged. Top up the water regularly, but you don't need to worry about changing it unless it becomes murky or a bit smelly. Now I've had this syngonium growing at home for the past couple of months. And look at all those roots. Now, I could keep it growing in water, but if I want it to flourish into a mature plant, I'm going to need to pot it on. I'm using a free draining mix for the cutting. Now you can see these roots are quite long, so I'm going to give them a trim so they can fit into their new pot. Now it's gone from a water environment to dry soil, so it's going to take a little bit of time to adapt to its new home. Water regularly to keep the soil moist, and this will help. Propagating cuttings in water is simple to do, so why not give it a try, and that way you can have more of the plants you enjoy.
Some of you might be sitting back right now enjoying a wine after a big week. Well, Sophie's here with an expert who's turning to nature's tiny helpers to make that glass even sweeter.
Here amongst the picturesque vine rows of the Adelaide Hills, a quiet revolution is taking place. One that's peeling back European ideas of growing grapes by using local plants to cultivate invertebrates for commercial pest control. Dr. Mary Retallick is an agroecologist and viticulturist and is at the forefront of ushering in this change. Mary leads the National Eco-Vineyard program, which started in 2019 and is actively influencing the practices of wine growers of over 150,000 hectares of wine country across 8 major wine regions right across the country. At the heart of the program are predatory arthropods, a term Mary uses to describe a class of invertebrates that prey on common vineyard pests. So how does the National Eco-Vineyard program work?
Well, Sophie, we're working in harmony with nature. We've got a focus on soil health, on ground covers, and also functional biodiversity, which is focusing on native insectary plants, the arthropods, so the insects and spiders found in association, and their capacity to provide biocontrol of some of the insect pests that we have in vineyards.
And how has the program been received by the wine industry?
It's been really warmly received, Sophie. There's just such genuine interest and engagement by growers. We're kind of going back to basics, but we're working smarter rather than harder, and nature has many of the answers that we're looking for.
Step 1 for eco-vineyards is getting rid of the rose bushes at the end of the rows, which Mary says have no value in an Australian context. In their place comes a suite of local native plant species that Mary pulls from plant communities present prior to 1788. The plant species Mary advises to use will vary depending on the vineyard's location. How big is the impact of these plantings in vineyards and the environment more widely?
It's got the capacity to have significant impact. We're wanting to build resilience into these production systems so we don't have to intervene as often, and most importantly, we're not having to spray chemicals in vineyards to control some of these insect pests.
So it's all about pest management, and the predatory arthropods hold a lot of answers.
Yes, absolutely. And it's not only the benefits in terms of biocontrol, but we get all of these other ecosystem services as well. So with soil health, we're getting nutrient cycling, we're getting better water infiltration, we're reducing erosion, we're building resilience into these systems so we don't have to intervene as often. So the system becomes self-healing, and it means that we get the benefit of being able to really work in harmony with nature, or the intelligence of nature.
Public enemy number 1 in the vineyard is the light brown apple moth. It's a native moth, but the small green caterpillar is a voracious eater and loves to chew on both vine leaves and fruit. There are 3 hero plants that have become staples in the Eco-Vineyards program because of their ability to tackle this moth and plenty of other pests. So the first of our plant heroes is Berseria spinosa, or sweet Berseria. How does this help the vineyard?
Sweet Bacteria will host a whole range of predatory arthropods. It has these fantastic flowers which provide an abundance of nectar and pollen. It's also an absolute magnet for a whole lot of parasitic wasps, and also the orange assassin bug.
And what does the orange assassin bug do in a vineyard setting?
Well, they're an example of a true bug, so they have piercing and sucking mouth parts. And when they find some prey, it might be a caterpillar, like the light brown apple moth, they use their proboscis, their mouth parts, and they skewer their prey. They then inject this saliva, which liquefies its guts, and then, well, you can imagine the rest. Yeah.
So they're a hero. They're what we want in our gardens too.
They are. You just need to be careful not to pick up the assassin bug if you find it, because it may give a nasty bite. But if you see them, they're very distinctive and they're fantastic predators.
So the second beneficial plant is this prickly tea tree, or Leptospermum. I can see it's just finished flowering. Why is this one such a magnet for good guys?
This plant, Leptospermum continentale, just has these fantastic proliferation of white flowers, and they pop like popcorn from the end of August onwards. And they also provide habitat for a range of spiders, but in particular the bird dropping or the bird poo spider.
And what does a bird dropping spider do in the context of a vineyard?
Well, it looks like a bird poo, which provides camouflage so that it's not consumed by birds. And it also is a very cunning predator, but a lazy one. So it will release a pheromone that mimics that of, say, a female moth. It waits for the male moths to come and find a mate, and it'll grab them with their big forearms.
And there's a third high-performing plant around this area, isn't there?
Yeah, we're looking at wallaby grass, which is Ritidosperma species, and you can see these fantastic fluffy seed heads. And there's a particular species that we like, which is called the need wallaby grass, and it grows really low to the ground. It provides breeding sites for brown lacewings and also wolf spiders, lots of ground beetles, which are all fantastic predators. And they like to predate light brown apple moth and other pest insects in the vineyard, especially at ground level.
Tell me more about the brown lacewings.
Brown lacewings are a fantastic predator. You also might be familiar with the green lacewings, which we find in the canopy of grapevines, and the larval stage are called junk bugs, and they lay their eggs on these lovely filaments, and that's because they're likely, once they're hatched, to eat each other. The brown lacewings, however, tend to be more ground-based, and they also have a lovely little larva, and they are like little pac-men, and they'll go through and eat the soft eggs of light brown apple moth and also some of the other key pests that we have in vineyards.
This vineyard has been part of the program since 2019, and the plantings are still establishing. Importantly, the vineyard now uses less inputs like pesticides, which means less money and labour and less collateral pesticide damage to the environment. Seeing this on a big scale like a vineyard is one thing, but there are lessons here for all of us at home too. Mary's place is a bush block set in stringy bark woodland, where she's planted thousands of tube stock of local native species at high density to encourage predatory invertebrates. So the principles applied to a vineyard can be applied to a home garden, and in particular a veggie patch.
That's right. We're providing habitat for a diversity of different arthropods. They help provide biocontrol of some of the pest species we might have in the veg patch. So exactly the same principle.
So what have you planted?
Well, as we saw at the vineyard, we have sweet Bacteria, we've got prickly tea tree, we've got the wallaby grasses. But here we're showcasing a whole range of low-growing woody ground covers. So species like New Holland daisy is fantastic for attracting ladybird beetles. We have a range of fanflower. We also have Myoporum, creeping boobiella. They flower all year round. We have saltbush, probably 20 different species here, which are all part of a pre-European plant species list. So they were here before we modified the landscape, so we know that they're going to do well in their natural setting.
So you've also got another veggie patch that's enclosed, and that's got in-ground beds. How have you incorporated local native plants in that?
Again, we've got a diversity of veggies in that smaller enclosure. And what I've done there is we've put the native insectary plants inside the enclosure right next to those plants in rows. So again, we're getting that benefit. Some insects have got short legs, so they don't travel as far, and others, like spiders, will balloon for kilometres. So it means that we're going to have, again, a diversity of different insects because we've got a diversity of different plants there providing habitat.
Whether you're at home or out amongst the vines, Mary believes the potential impact of this program is limitless. It's an approach to cultivating that really shows how everything above the ground is interconnected and how the health of a plant can support the health of insects, which support the soil and ultimately the whole ecosystem.
Adeniums are commonly known as desert roses. They can grow to 2 metres in height and look like fat, ancient baobab trees rendered in miniature. I wanted to show you this desert rose because it's very happy. In fact, it's producing pods. These seed pods will split when they're ripe, and the seed have wings and they'll float away. It's easy to germinate the seed, but to catch it, I wrap them in pantyhose. Now, this little design here with these pods sometimes will be found on frangipani, and it's often the cause of consternation. If your frangipani are producing pods, they're happy. It's not a disease. Now, another trick with these little desert roses is a way of displaying them. And by doing this, you can actually improve their looks. Every time you repot, you just loosen it like this in the pot. There we go. Now, I'm not going to put it in a bigger pot, but what I am going to do is to expose some of the roots. And this style is really popular in Asia, where this plant is very widely grown. There's a galaxy of cultivars available with just about every shade and colour under the sun available through collectors. So now you can actually see these are the roots which I want to expose here. So I'm just going to use these secateurs to remove these smaller growths because they're just getting in the way of it. To grow adeniums in the ground, you need a well-drained soil. It can be easier to grow them in a pot where using a succulent mix with a higher sand ratio will maintain drainage. The main trick when you've done this is to cover the exposed roots with a little bit of hessian so they don't get sunburn. And as the plant grows, you continually raise it so you get a combination of a swollen stem, rather like a baobab, and the exposed roots, and the result is really pleasing. And that's it.
I've been gardening this patch for about 10 years now. But for those of you who've been watching the program for a while, you might remember some of my previous backyards. To find more sun, I ended up around here, on the northern side of the house. We were renting in our younger years. So on a practical level, planting into containers and grow bags was a great way to go because they were cheap, flexible and portable. Portability is also handy if you're chasing sun or need some shade, which can be the difference between success and failure when growing veggies. Now, if you're going to plant into plastic containers, it's important that they're food safe. And the easiest way to tell this is to look for the numbers 1, 2, 4 or 5 at the bottom of the container. This 20-litre bucket is one you typically find in a restaurant kitchen or deli, filled with olives or feta cheese. It's a good size for growing larger plants, like Roma tomatoes. If you're thrifty, you can pick them up cheaply or for free. It'll need some drainage holes at the bottom, which are easy to make with a drill. Then fill with premium potting mix, plant, mulch, stake, and water in. For shallow-rooted crops like this lettuce, smaller 10-litre buckets are perfect. And for thirsty crops that can bolt if they dry out, I put the drainage holes about 4 centimetres above from the base, and that way a little reservoir of water forms to wick up into the root zone. But if it gets too wet, the water can still drain out. Food-safe containers with lids also make great in-situ compost buckets to attract worms and improve the soil around them. Drill a series of holes 2 to 3 centimetres in diameter all over so that worms and other invertebrates can easily get in and out. Then bury it, just leaving the top exposed. I'm packing coarse mulch around the outside to stop loose, dry sand from entering the bucket. Even at this small scale, the principle for making good compost is the same. Place nitrogen-rich greens, like your kitchen scraps, and browns such as paper and dry leaves in layers. And by positioning the container by a prized plant, like this plum tree, it'll become a feeding point to help it along. Well, there you have it. That's how easy it is to get growing and composting. Give it a go.
Plants, they give us so much, including the raw materials that skilled artisans use in their work. Our next story is with a pair who combine natural materials with precision and some serious patience to produce something that will stop you in your tracks.
When the straw arrives, it's sort of like this long tube that I take and split with my nail and flat it into a ribbon. And then I will stick each ribbon of straw edge to edge, one by one.
Straw marquetry as a practice has never been done before in Australia, so we have this absolute freedom where potentially if Arthur was still in France, you know, there's these expectations and this history and this pedigree that you have to respect. So it's kind of this nice cultural mesh that we're doing something very different. We can be absolutely free. The outcomes are greater than the sum of the two parts. We would never be doing this individually.
I first trained as a cabinet maker in fine woodworking.
Yeah, there was a real synergy even before we started working together in some ways.
Yeah, like I really want to do something a little bit different, and I was seeing all the waste in wood, and I thought, oh, the straw is really nice because it's sort of like this ecological material, really easy to transport. And at the time I was traveling a lot.
And Arthur and I met 7 years ago when Arthur moved from France to Australia. So Arthur came around with the straw and some of his samples, you know, which were just beautiful. I guess I already kind of love colour and repetition and pattern. We focus on creating unique objects that are covered in straw marquetry.
From what we know, straw marquetry arose around the 17th century. It was done more by convicts and religious people. At the time, it was worked on smaller objects, mostly boxed. The pattern on it was more landscape. When people couldn't afford to use wood marquetry, they were using straw instead. Now it's sort of become the opposite because of the time you spent on it.
The hand-making component to it.
Yeah.
And companies, very luxury brands like Hermes or Louis Vuitton, Cartier, have really embraced it recently.
With straw, it's like I find the possibility limitless.
Straw, actually, the cellular makeup has a glass component, and that's where it gets its reflective qualities and the iridescence. The straw's obviously dyed the colour, but there's no finish that goes on the straw. It is the natural straw that throws this incredible light and iridescence. Yeah, it almost looks like there's a battery behind it or something. We bring in the raw straw because we dye it ourselves.
I use powder dye mixed with hot water. I dip the straw inside and let it boil for a while. And for example, we wanted color variation of color which was similar but a touch darker, and so we had to take one straw, dye it, and then do the darker, and to sort of get to what the result that we want to get.
So our first piece called Bloom, we really focused it a lot on colour, and it's got a real oomph to it. I guess we established a pattern a little bit like a lotus flower, but it was lovely when you open the doors and you would get the iridescence and this kind of optical illusion of the in-out, in-out. After that, we wanted to do something that had three-dimensional forms and apply the straw to that to even enhance the optical illusion. And that was a significant sort of evolution that has informed all the pieces moving forward. And we just started working in this shape. I guess it's a bit like a spin top, or the actual technical geometry is called a sphericon. It's a little bit like this shape here.
I think every time I receive an email from Adam, I fly off my chair. I'm like, wow. It's a really strong design, and the second one is like, wow, I have to do that. The first time that I was like working on compound curves, so I had to invent quite a lot of tools to be able to do the patterns.
I think we were both thrilled when a journalist wrote that we were the punks of the straw marquetry kind of craft. And I think it's quite amazing, you know, for a craft that originated in the 17th century to do something which is very different. So for mother and child, yeah, we went monochrome. There's kind of two figures which are very abstract but connected. And then when you open the doors, there's this graphic representation, which I guess is quite unexpected.
Because the whole process is handmade, yeah, it can take many hours and spend months.
Like I think our largest piece might have 16,000 individual ribbons, so that's months upon months of laying the straw.
I guess it's meditative almost. It sort of reminds you that, yeah, sometimes it's good to take your time.
I think the production of pieces generally in the world now, it's all about things being done quicker and quicker, you know, and straw marquetry inherently is the total opposite of that. We're in no rush with these pieces. We just want to create, hopefully, special pieces, and if they take a long time, they take a long time. But in some ways, yeah, maybe it is a comment on rebelling against the fast nature of the world and all those consumerist things that exist.
Here at Gardening Australia, we're very task-oriented, and as usual, we've got a full agenda of gardening lined up for your weekend. But remember, it's a marathon, not a sprint. Cool temperate gardeners, it's apple harvest time. To check for ripeness, slice an apple in half horizontally and stick the two halves back together. If they hold, the fruit is ripe and you can keep on picking. Planning on planting some bare root roses in July? Prepare the soil now by digging through well-rotted manure and compost and planting a green manure crop of mustard greens. Garlic in the Creole group, including Rojo de Castro and Dynamite Purple, can go in now. Cracking in cool climates, these delicious varieties will store for at least 12 months after harvest. In warm temperate gardens, pick pumpkins before they fall foul of frost. Leave a little stalk attached to the fruit and store in a cool, dry spot until they're needed for soup or scones. Don't have much room? Grow some mushrooms. Grab an inoculated kit from your local nursery, keep it moist, and in no time, you'll be harvesting fistfuls of fab fungi. As you clear summer crops, be sure to turn spent mulch into the soil or collect it and put in the compost. This will help diminish winter habitat and hidey holes for slugs and snails. In the subtropics, fuchsias are finishing their flowering period, so it's time for a chop. They bloom on new wood, so a haircut now will prime them for future flowering come spring. Whack in Warrigal Greens, a native spinach alternative whose foliage is delicious once blanched. Tops for tricky spots, they're as happy growing in the shade as they are the sun. It's time to plant certified seed potatoes. Spuds need sunshine, space and rich fertile soil. So pop potatoes into a bed, bag or bin, eyes up, and continuously cover foliage with soil as it appears. In the tropics, flowering now is the blue ginger. With their incredible spikes of royal blue flowers poking out from glossy green leaves, this plant will light up any shady spot. Capsicums can be started now from seed. Look for smaller varieties for more reliable harvests, and don't be afraid of a bit of colour. If your heliconias have seen better days, get in there and give them a tidy up. Spent flowers and damaged stems can be pruned back now. In arid gardens, show your citrus some love. Prune now to remove dead, diseased or damaged wood. While you're at it, thin heavy crops to improve the quality of fruit. Keep the secateurs out and tip prune passion fruit to promote fruiting and improved yields. But don't bin the young leaves. They're edible and truly delicious in salads or stir-fries. Head out to the compost heap and move prepared compost onto garden beds, making space in the bin for fresh prunings and fallen leaves. What better way to celebrate International Compost Awareness Week? Autumn's an amazing time to get stuck into truckloads of jobs in the garden. So let us know what you get up to this weekend on our Gardening Australia social pages. Well, that's it for this time, but I hope you keep a bit of space for all the inspiration we've got coming for you next week. Here's what's in store.
I'm creating a pond complete with diverse plants, rocks and logs to entice frogs into my garden. It'll have almost everything they need, and I'm sure they won't be able to resist.
It's a great time to plant winter veg. And whilst old favourites are always welcome in our kitchen, it's also an opportunity to try something new.
I'm visiting the home and workplace of an architecture practice which is re-examining how we view housing density and the role the garden plays.